Welcome to the Ed Leaders Edge podcast, where we interview innovators and thought leaders in the field of education who are helping students thrive. I'm your host, Ed Madison. I'm a professor and researcher at the University of Oregon, an educational consultant, and serve as executive director of the Journalistic Learning Initiative, a nonprofit organization that empowers elementary, middle, and high school students to discover their voice, improve academic outcomes, and become self-directed learners through project-based storytelling. Welcome to our program. Well, welcome back to the podcast. David Flatley is a retired administrator with a distinguished 40-year career in both public and private school education. He was superintendent of schools at the Commack School District in Suffolk County, New York, and the Carle Place Union School District in Nassau County, New York, prior to that. Welcome to the program, David. How are you?
Thank you. I am well. Thank you.
Great. You know, we were talking a little bit earlier, and I think it's, you've been pulled out of retirement, several times, and particularly during the experience of COVID, which we'll get into. But I'm curious, in all the years that you've been working as an administrator in education, what would you say are some of the most significant changes you've seen from when you just got into it?
So, of course, the most significant change is the impact that technology has had on our work. Um, I am not ashamed to say that I used a Gestetner machine to make copies of materials for my classes
Is
just a
that the
little over.
one that with the ink with the blue? Okay, right. Okay, liquid.
That
Yeah,
was the one
ditto.
that
Machine
we
ring.
that we took deep breaths as they were passed around because they had that unique aroma.
Which
Um,
probably would be deemed illegal in schools today.
oh, guaranteed, guaranteed. Um, so yeah, the arrival and distribution of widespread access to technology, of course, particularly the internet and now artificial intelligence, the advent and evolution of technology has had just an absolutely tremendous impact on all of our lives, but particularly in the classroom.
hmm And moving faster than I think most of us in education are ready to understand. Right? I mean, as soon as we get a sense of understanding about social media, then AI is right up behind it, and so it's a conundrum for a lot of administrators, particularly, who are trying to figure out balance between what's useful and what's causing problems. Right?
Sure. For administrators, for teachers, for kids, their parents, as we spoke earlier, the COVID experience allowed an interesting window into our world for folks who maybe had only experienced it as children. And I
You're
think
speaking
they
of
they
parents,
began to
yeah, parents
understand.
being over the kid's shoulder and sort of seeing exactly what was going on in the
Sure,
classroom. Right?
and that may be the best case scenario.
Right.
So yeah, it was an interesting time. It was a time I think that allowed lots of folks to wake up to the challenges that we face as educators today. It's a difficult, challenging, meaningful, rewarding experience to be in the classroom with kids.
Mhm. I sometimes compare the teaching profession to the journalism profession in terms of having a bit of maybe it's a branding problem or something. It's in that people don't seem to appreciate the real sense of public service. I mean, people don't become teachers or journalists because they want to become wealthy. It's a sign of a sense of duty and wanting to make a contribution that I think and so I don't know how we do that. It's how we change the sort of the narrative about particularly public education so that the public really fully understands and appreciates what teachers do.
Yeah, I don't. I'm not sure that it's possible until and unless someone spends a year or two or three in the classroom and gets a sense of the rollout of multiple years experiencing multiple groups of kids over time, the opportunity that I've had in my experience to see generations of kids move through the public school system, the joy that that brings, and as you've pointed out, the sense of service. Yeah, I think we see it every day in our first responders, in our military, but it's hard to frame educators and our journalists in that light. I think that's difficult for people because it's something that's so outside of their true experience. They think they know what we are about because, of course, they spent 13, 15, 18 years in classrooms with us. But of course, they were experiencing that through the eyes of a child, and it doesn't always translate well as those folks become adults.
Hmm. Let's talk about, because you raised the topic of technology. Let's talk about mental health, and it's the headlines continue to be full of just startling statistics about the challenges our young people are experiencing right now. What is your sense of how we support our young people?
So of course, technology is in my mind, a wonderful tool. It's also fraught with huge challenges for kids. And as I've reflected on this over the years, I see those challenges in three areas. Firstly, that we have often said that kids are so resilient and they roll with change better than adults. I'm not sure that's true. I think that the speed at which technology moves and changes has a negative impact on us all, including children. Secondly, I think the access to developmentally inappropriate content is a serious challenge for our children. And of course, I'm not talking about just pornography or sexual content, but the content of violence is, I think, a real issue for very young children who have instantaneous access to violence. And then third, in its worst form, technology is isolating, and that's exactly the opposite of what we try to do in a classroom. Right, in a classroom, we try to bring kids together and provide them with a socialization process. And technology, in its worst way, in its worst form, puts a child one on one with himself or herself in an artificial world. And I think those three issues coming together in the lives of our children is a particularly dangerous place to be. And so your question of how to address that is about excellence in the classroom, and not just in terms of content, but in terms of the context in which we provide those experiences. And hopefully those are real, genuine types of learning experiences that kids can have together in a positive social environment. And then probably the most important word that I have come to understand in education is relationship. And so the relationship that we provide for kids with other children, and perhaps more importantly, the positive relationships that they can have with adults in their world.
Yeah.
And I think that those are the prescriptions that I would offer for the kids and all of us who are facing the anxiety and stress that comes with this technologically driven world in which we find ourselves.
Let's step away from our conversation for a moment for me to tell you about the Journalistic Learning Initiative's innovative educational tools and services. If you're looking to make the best decision for your teaching staff and students about AI adoption, improving student engagement, strengthening writing skills, promoting social media mindfulness, or enhancing college and career readiness, please take a moment to visit our website at journalisticlearning.org. Our team of University of Oregon researchers offer customized AI tools, instructional materials, professional development, and consulting. Research confirms that students with journalistic learning experience outperform their peers on numerous key indicators for college and career readiness. At the heart of our work is empowering learners to become effective communicators. If you think about it, effective communication is critical in every human interaction, whether it's writing an essay for a grade or being interviewed to secure employment. Since 2015, JLI has benefited nearly 20,000 students and served schools in 15 states and the District of Columbia. I invite you to schedule an appointment to explore how JLI can improve your students' learning outcomes. Now back to our program. A lot of the work that I do is informed by self-determination theory, and one of the three pillars of that is relatedness or relationship. The other two are agency and autonomy. So that agency, that sense that you have some choice in in how your learning sort of unfolds, and and competency, that sense that you can sort of address the task at hand. Apparently, there's a sweet spot. Like if it's something's too challenging, you want to give up, and if it's too easy, you don't want to. You're bored. So yeah, so
Right.
somewhere in the middle there. Yeah. There's so much talk about achievement gaps, and I know that you mentioned that. I know you've been involved in schools that are considered struggling.
Sure.
What's your approach to addressing some of the concerns about achievement gaps?
So, it's a great question, and if I had an answer that worked in every situation, I'd probably not be retired. I'd probably be doing something different. I've struggled with it my entire career. The experiences that well-heeled communities can provide their children as they grow are impossible to replace once those years have gone by. And so when we're faced with the gap that already exists, filling that up after the fact, I believe is next to impossible. And so for me, I think perhaps the answer is don't allow it to exist. Prevent it from happening in the very first place, and provide all of our kids, regardless of their zip code, with an opportunity to have excellent teachers, real opportunities for genuine, authentic learning, the opportunity to express what they know in a way that's culturally sensitive, and recognizes that there are multitudes of ways to express intelligence, and that selecting the correct multiple choice answer may be the very least effective way to allow children to express what they know and what they're capable of doing.
Yeah, I think we're starting to slowly, I think, understand the ills of high stakes testing, and that assessment can be done in a manner that looks at the whole child as opposed to just their ability to take tests. And that's such an important piece. I think leadership starts with setting a tone or a culture, and so I'm curious about how you look at that in terms of the districts
Great
that you've
question.
served.
And I believe you are correct. I have, of course, during my career, not always been the leader. I have been led by folks, some great and some not so great. And I've tried to take lessons from both. What I have come away with after 40 plus years working in schools with kids and teachers and great colleagues is that the best leaders are folks who surround themselves with people who are brighter than they are, and work to lift others up, and not care so much about their own progress. That comes in time. Not care so much about their own titles. I've had most of them in this K 12 arena, and the titles at this point in my career are truly meaningless. What matters to me is that the folks that I have worked with have picked up the responsibility of leadership, have I think learned some lessons from our work together, and hopefully we'll continue that, down the road into the next generation and the generation after that. It's about lifting people up. It's about developing relationships with folks, finding out where their strengths lie, and working through those strengths to allow everyone else around them to grow.
How do you advise new principals? Because often, a teacher who's been effective in the classroom now moves up potentially to a position of, leading and administrating that they may not have that expertise before that. How have you advised new principals?
Sure, great question, and I trust that folks who are aspiring to leadership of a building were probably good leaders in their classrooms, in that they recognized that to be an effective classroom leader, teacher, one needed to develop relationships with their students, find out what their students' interests are and strengths are, and develop learnings that leveraged those interests and strengths. And I would suggest that as a building leader, one does exactly the same with a different classroom. Now, the classroom is your classroom of your teachers. And if you approach your building as if it is a multi-walled classroom, and identify the strengths of the folks on the faculty, and identify the interests of the folks on the faculty, and leverage those strengths and interests to allow those teachers, other staff members to grow, that you're going to be successful as a building principal. That it's not so much about the X's and O's, that it's about meeting people where they live, recognizing that all of us lead lives of quiet desperation at one point or another, and hopefully they have identified a building leader who can be a pillar to lean on during those difficult times, and then during times when things are humming along and going great, be the cheerleader that keeps everybody motivated.
Hmm. When we were speaking earlier, you were saying that now being semi-retired, or you have the latitude or freedom to say things that that the new principal or new superintendent may not. I mean, any advice for folks that are trying to navigate some of these political quagmires and culture wars and all the other things that are so prevalent today?
It's so difficult for folks who hold these difficult, politically challenging positions and still need to, bring home a paycheck and put food on the table for their families. So you're in a position frequently where you need to be politically sensitive enough so that you can keep your job. But at the same time, you need to maintain your identity. You need to maintain your own truth. And in my experience, I find that being honest about your reactions to the political winds of the day, keeping an open mind to change, and dealing with those in authority, boards of education, for instance, in an honest way, the same way that you might deal with your classroom of students, finding out what's interesting to them, finding out what their particular strengths and weaknesses are, and finding ground for not always being the font of truth, not always being the font of every answer to every question, holding space for uncertainty. I think allows people to breathe a little bit easier together, even when they may have some political disagreements.
Well, thank you, David. This has been a great conversation. I'm so glad that we were able to connect today, and thanks so much for being with us.
Absolutely my pleasure, and thank you for your good work.
The Ed Leader's Edge podcast is produced by the Journalistic Learning Initiative. Please check out our latest books, Language Arts in Action from W.W. Norton Publishing, and Raising Empowered Learners from Rauman and Littlefield. For more information about our work, please visit journalisticlearning.org or edleaderedge.org. Thanks for listening.